into Paul's letters. And we ask in Jesus' name, the name of Yeshua. Amen. So this is the last bit of the year that we're looking at, and I like to start off like I often do with a quote from Neusner, where he said that the Septuagint translation contains elements of Jewish exegesis is obvious. It was, after all, a product of Jewish scribes or scholars. And then he goes on and says, in analyzing the exegetical tradition in the transmitted Septuagint manuscripts, modern scholars face a crucial decision: whether to date Midrash traditions in respect to their occurrence in the Greek Torah, or to explain Septuagintal changes as textual variants and the Midrash's commentary on earlier Hebrew text other than the so-called Masoretic one, the Textus Receptus, common in the Middle Ages onwards. In the first case, we have to postulate an influence of the Septuagint on rabbinic Midrash, which I think is correct. In the second case, we can date rabbinic exegetical tradition as early as the 1st centuries BCE, which I think is also correct. So hopefully we can kind of look at that a little bit and see where we're going here in today's session. So I want to start off with a loan word that we don't often see as a loan word in the New Testament, but it's the Greek word, or it's the Hebrew word manna, which is transliterated into the Greek in the New Testament. So the word manna is used in 4 sections of the Hexateuch, and it's used once here in Paul's writing. So we have 5 areas that we can look at through Midrash, either in the source text or in the Midrash itself. And I'd like to show how Midrash can be helpful in a word study. So the word study is the loan word manna, and we'll look at each of these sections just briefly to see if there's anything that Paul connects. So does he connect anything in Galatians with Exodus? Does he connect anything with Leviticus or in 1 Timothy and Deuteronomy? And I didn't see anything, but in the highlighted areas, Numbers and in Joshua and in Hebrews, I think there is something to take away from a word study of the word manna. So in Galatians, we see that there is only one verse, Galatians 3:19, in this section that is similar to this section of Exodus, where the manna and the quail were given, and an omer of manna was to be kept as a memorial. So I don't see anything here that really, although the manna is the bread of angels, we're told, is ordained through angels, that's like a very obtuse connection. So I didn't really make a connection there. In the next section, we have the manna was like coriander seed in its appearance, like that of bdellium. And so here we have the description of Anaphora. So it looks like someone who comes to someone else's aid, stands beside them, is like manna from heaven. So that is like a metaphor for that person. We've seen that before. Then in Deuteronomy, where he fed them with manna, I look real carefully in this section. Maybe you can see this something, but I really didn't see anything that he was really drawing from that section of Deuteronomy. And this is very Pauline. Sometimes he'll take something, sometimes he won't. So in this section, I didn't see anything. And then in this section of, so this is the same section, or this is the next section. And let's see, this is the second word use of the word manna here. So there's two uses, 8:3 and 8:16. So this is the second use of it. So Deuteronomy 8:16. And I really didn't see anything there as well. The interesting thing, though, is between 8:3 and 8:16, there is a chiasm in Deuteronomy with the central portion of inheritance of the land, but still there really isn't anything, maybe something obtuse, our inheritance of the promise of the proto-evangelium in Genesis 3:15, but really that's really obtuse. So really nothing really clear cut. And then the last one of the Hexateuch, the manna ceased and they ate the fruit of the land. So here we see whose mouth must be stopped. And so those that are reviling and unruly, their mouths must be stopped. So maybe you could say, all right, so now that the manna has stopped, Jesus said he is the bread of heaven. We've received the bread of heaven. So reviling and unruliness should stop because we've received the bread of heaven, Yeshua the Messiah. So in a way, it looks like he is doing a commentary on the manna ceasing and going into the inheritance, the fruit of the land, the promised land. So that's kind of a possibility there. And then in Hebrews, where he talks about the golden pot that is holding the manna within the Ark of the Covenant. We have this idea of Bethel, the house of God, and we have this idea of the tabernacle. We've seen that before. And then we have this idea of the golden pot, Aaron's rod. So we've seen this before. So we have this kind of an idea that we're in the Holy of Holies. We're in the tabernacle as, and these are the things that are in it. And Paul does talk about all the things that are within the tabernacle in his Midrash. And I won't go through all these, but we've talked about us being in the Holy of Holies before because the veil is rent. So it looks like he kind of includes the manna here in the in this kind of illusion that we are in the house of God. So through Midrash, I guess we could say that, well, there is a little bit here that we can say we're in the house of God. we're like, manna is like we can be like bread of heaven to people. And we shouldn't be reviling and unruly because we have the bread of heaven, we have the bread of life in our lives. So a little bit through Midrash, a little bit of extra that maybe we can add to word studies. I'm sure you've done word studies and looked at them all. Now we can see, maybe there's a little bit more we can get through Midrash in just a simple word study, with the example of the loanword manna. So a little bit more about this section of Hebrews. Of course, it means, what is it? This word coriander, it means to gash, and bedelium, which means distinguished. So Yeshua the Messiah is distinguished and gashed seed, and proclaimed himself the true bread of heaven. So, and what Paul does here is very interesting. He takes in this this section of Hebrews the word gold, 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 or golden, gold, gold, and it's a reflective echo of the gold, gold, gold in your section of Genesis, where the servant gave the what is it called, the bride price to Rebecca, right? And then in this section of Genesis, we have Jacob rolling away the stone to water the flock in the section of Genesis where the bride price in Amos talked about. Yeshua has become the collateral of a better covenant because he rolled away the stone to water the flock. So it's kind of a very anticipatory and reflective echo going on here, and it crosses two sections. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but I thought this was very interesting that this is happening. But here you can see the gospel just totally in this crossover. I don't know exactly what to call that, but it's certainly there, and you can see the triple use of the word gold in both sections. So I kind of want to skip over and talk about some first use words out of Amos. We saw the first one last week. They sawed by iron, saws the ones having the one in the womb in Gilead. And interesting, it's used in Hebrews 11:37, which is a huge flag right here. So I'll show you the flag. So the again, here is, it alludes to 1 Kings 8:17, where the women were sawed in two and they were pregnant. So it's a gruesome death. And here is this this idea where they were sawn in two. So remember, this is within the faith chapter of Hebrews 11, and we've seen this before. And this word faith is not the Genesis 15:6 use of the word, it's the use of the word out of Deuteronomy 32:20. So it's the noun form of the word. So here we go. we saw this, here's the Deuteronomy 32:20. I will turn away my face from them, and I will show what will be to them at the last times. So this is within the contextual meaning of this word, for it is a generation being distorted, sons in which there is no belief in them. And then we saw the ellipsis in Galatians. And this is to be compared with the verb, Abram trusted in God, it was imputed to him as righteousness. So this is a Strong's number here, and this is a Strong's number here. So they're different words. So Paul could have used, said in Hebrews 11:1, he could have said, to trust is the reality of hoping in things, the proof of not being seen. But he didn't use the verb form at all. He used faith as the reality. So he was pointing us contextually to the last times, which we know this chapter is built around the faithfulness of Jacob's sons, the sons of Israel, to return to Joseph. And that is, we've seen that before. And here we have this little idea of, is during the last times, are women going to be sawed apart to get rid of their children? And gruesomely, yes, this is happening. Abortion is more prevalent than ever. And we saw a lot of different things that Paul is using here to kind of indicate the signs of the time. And I'm afraid to say the United States is a big part of this sawing apart, and it's just gruesome. But it's a sign of the end times. When I was an intern, I delivered a little baby this was 1982. I delivered a little baby that was 26 weeks old. In 1982, there was no way to save that little baby. It was in the palm of my hand. That was how big she was. And she was gasping for breath, and her little heart was beating, and there was nothing I could do except hold her and try to keep her warm in my hand. And there was nothing to do except to see that little life extinguish. I have asked God if I could adopt her in heaven and just be her adopted dad. But it's a gruesome thing that what we're doing is sawing these little children apart. So the second word that is in Amos 5:8, and it's the one making all things and fashioning them differently, and turning the shadow into morning and darkening a day into night, the one calling on the water of the sea and pouring it onto the face of the earth. The Lord God Almighty is his name. And obviously, we know this from Colossians 3. This is the Lord. This is a description of the Lord, Yeshua, the Messiah. This is Jesus, who created all things and turns the shadow into morning. It's used in several places, or in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places in the Midrash. We'll only look at the first one, Hebrews 12:13. In this fellow's meaning, I'll leave a few things undone, and maybe there'll be time to come back to them, or maybe you'll have time to come back to them later. But what this word is translated, so what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. So this word, be dislocated, has been is the word turning light turning a shadow into light in Amos 5:8. And this is only can be done by God. This is only can be done by Yeshua the Messiah. So this is this idea. We're still in following up after Hebrews 11, this profane offering of worship to God, and this profane worship is alluded to by Aaron's son. Sexually immorality is just rampant today, but this idea that what is lame might be dislocated is this very interesting beacon in the middle of all this that's happening, and it's going to be accomplished by the Lord Yeshua the Messiah. Of course, we're talking about the Midrash here of the Midrash. There's obviously a pashat, a superficial reading there too. The last one is this is in Romans 6, and it's from Amos 9:13. So let's look at this word. Behold, days come, says the Lord, and the threshing shall overtake the gathering of crops. We've heard this before. And the grapes shall grow dark in the sowing, and sweetness shall trickle down the mountains, and all the hills shall be planted together. So this word shall be planted together is the word that we're looking at. And it only has this use in Romans 6:5 in Paul's Midrash. And here you can see where it is. It's translated here, we may be united with him. And more accurate translation is that we are planted together with him. And what does that actually mean? We will be part of his resurrection. So in the idea of planting together, we have this idea of planting a dead seed into the ground and expecting it to come to life. So within the very context of what Paul is saying, he is actually using it like a seed being resurrected. We'll be resurrected with him. So if we become planted together in the likeness of his death, we will be part of his resurrection. And obviously, we see this in baptism. We die with him. We will live with him in newness of life. So interesting thing that Paul does, he uses all these the words that have the with in the prefix of the word. Here's the word with, and here's the word live with him. Here's the word died with him. Here's the word crucified with him. So, and here's buried together with him. So here we have all these ideas of living with. In the Septuagint, we have these the laws of the leper, and we have this warp or woof from garments, and the warp is the material, the direction of the material in one direction, and the woof is the direction of the material in the other direction. So they're woven together. And this idea of a woven together garment. So we are like a woven together garment. And so that's where Paul gets all these with words. And it gets it from the warp and the woof, which is only used in this section of Leviticus. So it's an anchor point, a very unusual anchor point. But those are the words that Paul uses from Amos, and he is very careful in his use of them, because he could have used other words. He could have made up a word, but he wasn't. He just took them right out of Amos. And that could be a much deeper study than that, but it's I thought it was quite interesting. So are you up with me?
Yep. Yep.
Excuse me. So I'd like to talk a couple handfuls of literary devices, and I want to talk a little bit about literary devices in a way that we haven't really talked about literary devices. Now, there's a great 900 or 1,000-page PDF that's available online if you look up Bullinger figures of speech, and there's it's just a indispensable thing that resource. So I've got this in the talk, and a lot of this is from him, but a lot of it's not. So you'll want to download his 969-page treatise, which is free online. I think you can Google that, and when this comes out as a PDF, you can come back and look at it. So the first one is an anacoluthon, and literally in the Greek, it means not following. So it's a breaking off of the sequence of thought. So the one that we want to talk about is in Galatians 2:6-9. So we often look at it like a parenthesis in the middle of a sentence. Oftentimes now we have these dashes in the middle of a sentence. So this is the anacoluthon right here. So you could say, but from those who were reputed to be important. This is not it. This is not the anacoluthon. They, I say, who were respected, imparted nothing to me. So you could leave this out completely, but this is what is called just an anacoluthon. And there's other examples of this as well. But what I wanted to look at is, and see whether or not Paul took this out of the Septuagint. Was there an anacoluthon in the Septuagint that he actually used this literary device? So if you look at this section of the Septuagint, we have the appositives, and I'm wondering whether or not this idea of the appositives, did he actually take that and put it and use this literary device? Now, I don't know that for sure, but I'm wondering whether or not that's what he did.
So what's the appositives?
Okay. So he says, I am the Lord your God. You knew me as El Shaddai, but not as the Lord. So this bet in front of the El Shaddai applies to both Jehovah or Yahweh, however you want to say it, as well as El Shaddai, and it's within Exodus 6:3. It's a very famous literary device in the Hebrew to say the bet in front of El Shaddai. So here's here's now I'd really like to get deep into this idea. Did Paul take literary devices out of the Septuagint? So let's just start with Ephesians 7:1, this idea of the apposition. So apposition, of course, is just two phrases that stand in apposition to each other. We learned this in like basic English, but here it is in Ephesians 1:7, in whom we have our redemption through his blood. So the redemption of our blood, and then this, the forgiveness of our trespasses. So this is this idea of apposition according to the riches of his grace. And in this same section, in the simulative section of Isaiah, we have in Isaiah 3:24, it shall happen that instead of sweet spices, there shall be rottenness. Instead of a belt, a rope. So there's the apposition right there. Instead of well set hair, baldness. There's the apposition. Instead of a robe, wearing of sackcloth. There's the apposition. And a branding instead of beauty. So the normal way of saying it is branding instead of beauty, and there's this idea of an apposition that Isaiah puts into this section. So here are the two next to each other, and there's this idea: is this apposition in Isaiah? Did Paul bring it out of Isaiah 3:24? It's not very convincing if you just look at one, but let's look at some more. But I want to just take an interlude now and show you something very interesting. I'm proposing a term, the intersecting Midrashim. So you put on your thinking cap here for a second. So the Midrash in Hebrews 3 of the promise given to Abraham, there's in Genesis, that's in Genesis 13, Paul midrashes the mighty works of God in the wilderness. So it seems like out of place. And then in the Midrash of Galatians 3, at the start of the wilderness journey, in Exodus 12, Paul, seeing the mighty works of God, Paul midrashes what that promise of Abraham is. So let's just look at it diagrammatically here. So here is one section of the Midrash, and here is one section of the source text, and here's the other section of the Midrash, and here's the other section of the source text. So in this section of the Midrash, we see that out of the source text, the Lord spoke to Abram and reaffirmed his promise of land to his descendants. And then in this section of the Midrash, now the promises were spoken to Abraham and his offspring. He doesn't say to descendants as many, but to one, to your descendants, which is Messiah. And then in this section, he says, for whom, when they heard, they rebelled. Wasn't all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? And then he goes on from there. And then in this section of the source text, he talks about those who came out of Egypt. About 600 men, a mixed multitude went with him. So interesting, Paul crosses lines here, and I call this a intersecting midrashim. And we saw that kind of in this section where the gold was used in kind of an idea. So this looks like a Pauline way of doing things. And so that is a little bit of a finding there There's others too, so I'll show those as we go through the year. So epizeuxis, I really didn't, this was not in my vocabulary. Is this in your vocabulary?
Nope.
I know, right? It's like like totally outside of the realm of what I'm used to thinking. Let's look at the easy one first, Ephesians 3:9. So there's this repetition of the definitive article in the Greek. So essentially, this is the one that makes all things, who has created all things. So this is this idea of epizeuxis, a repetition of a word. In the English, it's translated the one, the all things having created. We typically leave the second the out, and the one who created all things is how it is in the Greek. In this section, in the simulative section of Isaiah, we have this idea, he who will keep us in perfect peace, and the word is shalom, shalom. So all of a sudden, we have an epizeuxis in the simulative section of Isaiah with the simulative section of Ephesians. Did Paul do that on purpose? In Hebrews 10:37, he does this a little bit differently. He says a little while, which we've seen before is a quote, and it actually may be an allusion to the twins that are in Tamar's womb. So he uses epizeuxis to make an allusion to the twins that are coming out. We've seen this a little bit before. Paul links these two, and this is a Hillel principle that we've seen before, links Isaiah 26:20 and Habakkuk 2:3. And I think your Bible, you said, yes, the annotation is in there, Isaiah 26:20, but only maybe 20% of annotated Bibles have Isaiah 26:20 in here. But it's a direct quote from that a little portion of Isaiah 26. And is this epizeuxis did he do it on purpose to allude to the birth of twins, which is this idea of epizeuxis? So I see that as fascinating, what Paul could have been doing there. The other one that we looked at, the idea of the duplication of the definitive article, is right here. You created all things. We don't see it in the Greek, and then this idea of perfect peace right here is this idea of epizeuxis. So we have this connection here, which now makes you think, he didn't do that on accident. He actually was looking deeply into literary devices in the Hebrew. So he did a midrash on the Greek, but he did not ignore the Hebrew. Quite impressive, I think. Then we have this idea of anaphora, which is a use of alternate words to avoid repetition. So here in Exodus, or in Galatians 1:8-9, we have, but even though we or an angel from heaven should proclaim you any good news, now here's the anaphora, other than that which we preach to you, let him be cursed, as we have said before. So now I say again, if anyone preaches to you any good news other than what you receive. So here's the anaphora. So to avoid repetition, other than what we preached, other than what you received. So there's the anaphora. So that's quite interesting. In the same section of Egypt, in Exodus, is a very simple anaphora, substituting a pronoun for the word. The Egyptians ruthlessly made the children of Israel serve, and they made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and all kinds of service in the field, and all their service in which they ruthlessly made them. So here's the anaphora, and here's actually another anaphora, the Egyptians and the Egyptians here. So did Paul see the anaphora that was there, and did he put it in here? I'll let you be the judge of it. It happens over and over and over again. I've kind of left it out until now to kind of look at, but in all the previous literary devices, there here. So here are the two sections next to each other. So here's an anaphora with an ellipsis, so two literary devices. For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of darkness, this age, and against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. So what he does, all these words are in the same tense as, or parsed the same way as the original one, but he leaves out our wrestling. So our wrestling against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places, our wrestling against the world rulers of the darkness. So this is, he's said it differently, but he's done it with ellipses. So this is an anaphora with ellipses. And then in the simplificative section of Isaiah, we know this from Yeshua's quote in Luke, quotes the first part of this, but he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort those who mourn, to provide for those who mourn, to give to them a garland for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spiritual heaviness. So he could have said, he has sent me to release those who are bound. He has sent me to proclaim the year of the Lord. He has sent me to proclaim the day of vengeance. He has sent me to comfort, but he didn't. So this is an anaphora with ellipsis in that same section, or in the symbolistic section of Ephesians. So Paul uses this literary device to point to a literary device in the source text. Quite impressive, huh?
I'm just trying to sorry, my brain is really not working very well. I'm trying to get my head around these ones. I'm trying to
I know.
see
I'm still trying to get my head around it too, and I've been looking at this for weeks, thinking, when am I going to present this? And so this is the week to present it. All right. So here's epanalepsis, and that's a repetition of the initial part of a clause at the end of the same clause. Have you ever heard of this word, epanalepsis?
Nope.
No, me neither. It's like
no, I'm no literary theorist. I haven't heard any of these.
It's going to be interesting to see how many of these Brandon knows, but I'm expecting him not to know very many either. So this is repetition of the initial part of a clause at the end of the same clause. Now, this seems almost like esoteric to be talking about all these things. But remember, we're putting together the puzzle pieces, and next week we'll have a review. But we're putting all the puzzle pieces of this midrashic hermeneutics of the New Testament. So here we have repetition of the initial part of the clause at the end of the same clause. So in Romans 3:25 through 26, we have whom God sent to be an atoning sacrifice through faith in his blood. And here's the epanalepsis, for a demonstration of his righteousness through the passing of prior sins in God's forbearance to demonstrate his righteousness. So there it is, the repetition of the initial part of the clause at the end of the same clause. And in Leviticus, we have this idea, this is the thing which the Lord commanded that you should do, and the Lord's glory shall appear to you. Moses said to Aaron, draw near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering and make atonement. So here is an epanalepsis within an epanalepsis for yourself and for the people, and offer the offering of the people and make atonement for them as the Lord commanded. So here's two epanalepses, but this kind of gives you an idea of chiasm within the writings of the Tanakh, which we know is true. So there's a lot of epanalepsises just built into chiasms. And here's one out of Ephesians. For this cause, I, Paul, am a prisoner of Messiah Yeshua. On behalf of the Gentiles, for this cause, I bow my knees. So this is a repetition of the epanalepsis. So the question is, does it happen in Leviticus? Well, there it is. There's the two sections of Leviticus and Romans, the two epanalepses. And it all centers around the glory of the Lord. So I won't. I'm going to have to. I left some out because I thought it would just take too long to keep doing these. But paradiastole is to reframing, and it's often seen with neither nor. So I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, this is a paradiastole, nor things present, nor things to come, will be able to separate us from God's love, which is in Messiah Yeshua our Lord. So this is a literary device called paradiastole, to put next alongside. Literally is what it means in the Greek. There's epistrophe. I had heard this word, and I'd heard the paradiastole before, but this is idea where there's a repetition of the word at the end of successive clauses. Then what shall we say then about these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? So this repetition of us right here, it makes it really sound really good in Greek, but it is also a literary device called epistrophe. The question is does it happen in the similitude section of Leviticus? Is that where Paul is taking this literary device? I've left that out just as just to make you wonder a little bit. So Appeno Diplosis is repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning and the end of a sentence. I'd never heard of this before. So here in Galatians 2:20, I live, but Messiah lives. That's an epanalepsis in that section, in that verse. And then in Romans 8:24, hope that is seen is not hope. That's an Appeno Diplosis in that section of Romans. So the question is, did Paul do it out of Exodus and see that and put it in Galatians? I'll leave that for another time, because I want to get to get to this first use of Psalm 95 in Hebrews 8:9, 3, 8, and 9. So he says, today, if you will hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as in the rebellion like as the day of the trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me and tried me. And so I wanted to kind of look at this. This is within the Lech Lecha, the go forth, the calling of Abram by the pre-incarnate Messiah. But I wanted to kind of look at this idea. Why did Paul actually use three quotes of Psalm 95? So we have this idea of a partaker of a heavenly calling. And we know what that word partaker means from 1 Samuel 20, verse 30, taking off the right to rule our own lives, giving it to the anointed one. And this this idea of a heavenly calling is we're sharing this going forth that the Lech Lecha that Abram had. And here is this idea of Yeshua, who was faithful to him, was appointed him. Also, Moses was all his house. And this idea is there were two groups of people at this time, and the earth was divided. We had Peleg, which was an ancestor of Messiah, and we had Joktan, which means he will be made little. And the Peleg means water channel, and he's looking forward to Messiah. So here we have this idea that the earth was spiritually, the earth is spiritually divided. And within this section is the Tower of Babel. So the earth is still spiritually divided. But in the midst of this, we have this idea of the first use of Psalm 95. So we have a few minutes to go. I'm a little bit faster than what I thought I would be. But the question is why does Paul use this idea of Psalm 95 within this section? So here is this, what happens in the next section is Abram goes into Egypt. So he has a second part of his journey in Egypt. And here we have those who came out of Egypt, those that entered Egypt. So here we have this idea of the use of Psalm 95 centered around this idea of entering or leaving Egypt. So that's the first use of the use of the quote from Psalm 95. And I'm open to suggestions on this. I'm just reaching out, just trying to see why did Paul do this? And if you see something that I don't see, speak up, for sure. Here's this idea of the builder of the house right here. And here's this idea of the building of the Tower of Babel. And here's this idea of Messiah building his house, right? And then here's the first use of Psalm 95. So built into this use is we have the idea the earth is spiritually divided. we have this idea of Messiah building the house, Moses building the house, being faithful. He who built the house has more honor than the house. And then we have the laklaka, the calling of Abram built into this as well. So I have a little tickle in my throat. Let me go get a
Hello.
welcome again.
Thank you.
So we've just gone through a fire hose of literary devices. So
Okay.
We'll get that at the end for you.
Sounds
But
good.
right now we're talking about something that is just still I'm sorting out an enigma. So Paul quoted Psalm 95 3 times in Hebrews, and it's within the call of Abram, and it's also right along the time when the earth was divided. So Peleg, an ancestor of Abraham, means water channel. It looks forward toward the Messiah. And Joktan, he will be made little. And so there's this idea of within the call of mankind, or the call of Abram, and we have this same idea that we're being called. And here we have this idea of Moses built the house and the building of the Tower of Babel, Messiah building the house. And then we have this idea of the earth is spiritually divided. And then we have the next two quotes of Psalm 95. So, and it seems to be all centered around either entering into Egypt or coming out of Egypt. So here we have, they wouldn't enter in, they will not enter in. So here we have all these ideas of Psalm 95. So here we have Abram entering into Egypt, and then he leaves Egypt. So we have these 3 portions of Abram's life. He's in the promised land, then he goes out of the promised land, but then he goes back into the promised land. And here we have Paul using Hebrews or Psalm 95 3 times. And it seems to be that he's alluding to these 3 portions of Abraham's life, either before, within, or after Egypt. And I'm open to suggestions about that, but this seems to be what Paul is doing, is he's using Psalm 95. Now we know from Hebrews 7, he uses Psalm 110 twice, using an analogy, but here it looks like he's using Psalm 95 3 times. And it seems to be alluding to Abram's coming, entering in, and going out of Egypt. What do you guys think?
What comes to mind for me is what I was thinking about last night, actually, is that if we look at Moses and Abraham lived in tents. Moses built tents. He built the tabernacle sort of in a tent. Paul was a tent builder. And so we have this sort of tent building theme until we get to Jesus. And then Jesus really wasn't a sort of ordinary carpenter. He didn't make chairs and things. Jesus was a builder. So Jesus built things in stone. So we have sort of up until we have Jesus building sort of, and God is the God referred to as a rock. So it's as though, you know, we have almost a temporary theology in everybody except Jesus and God. So Jesus is like the culmination. He's the only one who actually is like the rock of, he's the only one who can build theology and set down knowledge in stone. All the others have been sort of tent builders.
I'd heard before that Jesus as a carpenter, or Joseph as a carpenter, would have just done more than just make tables and chairs. They were the builders of those days. So yeah, so that's interesting comparison.
That's just what springs to mind, that, you know, that that they're the God and Jesus, they're the rock of ages, and no one comes to rest apart from in them. Although we do have Solomon building a temple, but maybe, you know, he had the wisdom of the Spirit instilled in him.
So that this is something I'm kind of working my way through, and it's this idea of those who come out of Egypt and they who went into the Egypt, and this brackets this entering of Egypt by Sarah and Abram and exiting of Egypt by the children of Israel. And it's Paul uses three uses of Psalm 95. If you don't count this little phrase here, they wouldn't enter his rest, as one. That's just an allusion to Psalm 95, not really a quote. But it's this idea of are we going to stay in slavery, or are we going to stay in the promised land? You know, we didn't know Messiah, but then when we heard about Messiah, then we are in Egypt, but then when we accept Messiah, we're in the promised land. Kind of working this idea out. So I came on to this, or I kind of made this idea of what's the definition of confidence. Confidence is to carefully consider and attentively ponder Yeshua the Messiah, his eternal existence and preparation for his believers, his holiness, his sufferings, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, his intercession, his return for his bride, his return for judgment of mankind, that I may see the claims to a holy life, and that I may learn him. So that's the an idea of confidence from this section of scripture. So now I kind of want to hit on something that let's wait for this until we talk about the articles. So give me a second here. Little teaser there to see what Brandon has come up with, but let's do Kelly first. How's your article coming?
I think I've got the final ordering of how it's going to be, which which is quite a big deal for me, because I'm always changing things around radically. But the bit I've really got to do is the bit the work on the your ideas and the Hekesh bit. So I've got to speak to Gideon rather. And once I've done that, then I've got some extra reading to do to make sure I haven't missed anything out.
I showed him the Hebrew that you included in your article, and he was so impressed that because that is the classic example of Hekesh in Hebrew, except he was looking at it and it was gobbledygook to him because the words on the left were supposed to be on the right, and the words next to the one on the left were supposed to be next to the one on the right. It was interesting how it happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
We can't.
I cut and pasted it.
Oh,
so I haven't read it in the Hebrew.
okay.
I cut and pasted it ready to analyze it and look at it. So yeah, I've got to go through it. So
yeah, he caught it right away, and he said, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is gobbledygook." But he did say that section of was the classic way, and then he looked it up on. We spent some time, 30 minutes, looking at Hekesh in the Tanakh and looking at other examples, and he said, "And oh, this is a very, very rare example, and this is." But yours, the one that you picked, is very classic. So kudos to you.
I will. Well, kudos to some. I think there were rabbinic scholars on a Jewish chat website that I.
Well, he's looking forward to you.
Joined in on, yeah.
He's really looking forward to you making a just an appointment on his calendar. And,
yeah, I will do that.
Talk to him about that.
Yeah.
He's got me talking to a woman from Italy, I think, in a couple of days. So he's keeping me busy too.
Keeping you busy, good. Yeah.
Keeping me out of trouble.
Yeah.
Brandon, how about you? How's your article coming?
Going so good. Let's see, I've drawn the lines. It's just coloring them in now. So my outline's looking good. I've got 32 pages of references. So it's just figuring out how to cull that down, figuring out which ones. Well, my outline is doing pretty good. So what I have been doing is figuring out all of that and seeing which ones I need to address as counter arguments and which ones I need to address as support. It's been kind of difficult because sometimes authors contradict themselves within their own papers. So it's like to represent them as a whole is also kind of contradictory. So you have to like splice them up. Be like, well, he says this here and he says this here. So that's been fun. I've called it reference mapping. I think it's my new favorite hobby. So that's been pretty cool. I was looking into the Oxford Journal, figuring out all about what I need to do for their submission and everything like that. And I got the title, I think, unless you guys have some ideas. I'm thinking Sarah's Missing Mountain in the Galatians Allegory.
Say it again.
Sarah's Missing Mountain in the Galatians Allegory.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Cool. A lot of the articles in this field right now really have like technical language. Like the first one I'm looking at is Paul's Isaiah 51 quotation in Galatians 4:27. That's by Mark Gignilliot. So I'm just like, a lot of them are pretty technical. So I wanted to put a little bit of technicality with like Sarah, Galatians, allegory, but I'm hoping the missing mountain is tantalizing enough to make it interesting.
So, Kelly, back to you. In your, where did you get Joseph's well in your title?
Oh, it was It was supposed to be Jacob's well. I just mistyped it.
So Jacob's well is in, I think is in Shechem, right? So
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I just wrote the wrong well. Yeah.
so we're talking about Haran. So it
Yeah.
should be the well in Haran if you're going to
Mm,
use that title. Tell us
yeah.
the title that you had put on yours.
So I had, where is it? Let me think. Where is it? Let me find it. I had evidence for the virgin birth at Joseph's well, and the Joseph was completely wrong. I just had, yeah, just completely put it in wrong. So yeah, evidence for the virgin birth will be now at maybe Rebecca's well.
Yeah, it could be Rebecca as well. It's not called that, but yeah.
It's not. It'll be evidence for the virgin birth at somewhere, or in Rebecca's narrative or something like that.
Okay. Well, great. So now I kind of want to pull a fast one on you, Brandon.
Yeah.
So hope you don't mind me pulling a fast one on you.
Oh, no way. Let's do it. I love it.
So the question is how did Paul get Golgotha out of this section of Exodus? You have any thoughts about that?
Just one or two, David, just one or two. The biggest, okay, I have a broad view. It's the entirety of Galatians. He's been leading up to it.
Okay.
It's all about Jesus Christ.
Okay.
So that's where freedom is found, is on Calvary's Hill. So he has been leading up to it in a conceptual way since he started penning down Galatians. Specifically, he points us to it via Isaiah. In Isaiah 54:1, we have a bridge between a few different sections of Isaiah. The first, I think it's 39 chapters of Isaiah, is Israel's kind of shame and what they have done wrong and how they've rejected things. And then the second half, I think it's 40 through 66, is about their promise and what's to come and everything like that. But Isaiah 54:1 is the bow, and before that speaks about the suffering servant. So by giving us this allegory in the most central part of his argument, the conclusion of his whole argument of Galatians, he gives us this allegory which has frustrated both the Jews of his time and us scholars now, to like a few thousand years later. And people are having trouble making sense of certain parts of it because it gives us like a thesis and an antithesis. And it gives us sets of those like Sarah and Hagar and Isaac and Ishmael and New Covenant and Old Covenant. And then it gives us Mount Sinai, and this is like a location, and it says Mount Sinai in Arabia. And that wants to point us to Arabia to look at what happened there, what's still happening there, what does that represent to the original people, to that time. And then he doesn't give us a location for the opposite side. And this is pretty clear to all scholars that there is this gap. And if we follow the clues he gives us, which is, it's not really a clue, it's pretty blatantly obvious, because he quotes a whole section of Isaiah, which he doesn't do often. So he wants us to go back to Isaiah. He wants us to return to the scriptures. By titling it as allegory, he wants us to look deeper than what's surface level. That much is apparent. Anyone who uses allegory wants us to reject the literal and look behind the scenes, look at what his intent is. Well, his intent is to bring us to Isaiah 54:1. And when we look at what precedes up into Isaiah 54:1, is the suffering servant, which happened in Golgotha on Calvary Hill. So once we look at that, it ties the whole text beautifully together. It's no longer a gap in an awkward allegory, in an awkward part of his conclusion. It really does point back to Jesus Christ, which is what Paul has been trying to do in every letter, and what he's trying to preach, both to the Galatians who are new believers, and also to push back against those who have a mission of circumcision for these new believers.
Now I'm gonna pull a whammy on you.
All right.
So here is the key that I think Paul saw the glory of the Lord on Mount Sinai. And remember what Jesus said. He said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. So we have the greatest antithesis, the glory of Messiah pre-incarnate on Mount Sinai, and the glory of the incarnate Messiah on Golgotha. It's quite different than Mount Sinai. It's not the glory. If you would have heard him say this, you wouldn't have anticipated him. You wouldn't have anticipated this. We don't see a crown of gold. We see a crown of thorns. We don't see a throne. We see the suffering servant on the cross, spit upon, beat, and crucified, going where no man could go but him, going onto the cross. So this is I believe this is how Paul saw this out of Exodus. He saw the glory of the Lord on Golgotha. And it's totally unanticipated. You know, I think that's part of this idea of Mount Sinai, Golgotha. The idea is the glory of the Lord is on both of them.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I'm trying to put it in the context, because he starts off the allegory with, you who want to be under the law, don't you know what the law says? So when I think when he's referencing Mount Sinai, it's under the context of law versus freedom. And we definitely see that God gave Moses the law, but then Jesus gives us the freedom, both on the mountain. So yeah, I definitely think glory has a part in it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the way to link in the how did Paul see it? Obviously, there's the words are similar. I didn't put them. Well, here's all the. Oh yeah, so we don't have all. I don't have all the words in this section of Galatians. I can't remember how many actually fit together, but this is kind of a unspoken comparison between the two.
Mm.
But he does. He gives the 10 Commandments here.
Yeah.
So he is the pre-incarnate Messiah in all his glory is there giving, this is my best attempt at a watercolor of showing the glory of Christ. And,
Mm.
so there you have it. There's how I think Paul took it. There's in that section of Galatians, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 15 words that are assemblative. So 15 words in 11 verses. So that's a pretty good rate.
Okay.
So somehow or another, I don't know if you're including the idea of the framework, but there's a idea of the framework as well. But I think
Yeah.
it's the glory.
Okay. My biggest, the biggest counter argument I'm running into is, so I think scholars either handle this two ways. They say that the second mountain, it doesn't matter. It's just a gap, or it's, okay, so maybe three. The second way is that it's absolved into the New Jerusalem. So that's locational enough that we don't have to find it. And the third is that the missing mountain is Mount Zion. So that's my biggest counter argument, if one existed. Nobody's really offering arguments on this, but I have to build up that argument essentially. So that's been interesting to figure out if it is Zion and why I think it's not Zion. So.
All right. Well, there you have it. All right. Well, Kelly, what do you think of what do you think of
He sounds so well organized. and really, like, he really knows what he's doing, and he's got it all planned out, and it's just like, yeah, it sounds really great, really exactly as an article should be.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, so clear and precise and straight down the line. So well done, Brandon. Yeah. I feel like in comparison, I feel like mine is sort of up in the air, and yeah.
Oh, it's okay. Your concepts are a lot different than my concepts. Different articles for sure.
Definitely. And I think they're comparable as far as difficulty, and I think it's comparable how you guys are progressing on it. So kudos to both. This is our 12th week, so we're going to be finishing the quarter this next week. So we should be getting close. I'm hoping the first week of January that you are able to give a little presentation, and we'll do if you wanted to do slides or something, feel free to make some slides, and we'll share slides during the presentation. So hopefully in a couple weeks we'll do that. If you need another week or so, let me know. The next article, I hope you'll find a little bit easier. We'll do something a little bit easier, but I really put you guys both in the deep end. I'm not sorry about it. I'm just like, just admitting that, yes, I did that to you guys. It's mea culpa.
Thank you.
All right. So Kelly, we'll see you next week.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Take care.
See you soon. Oh,
Bye.
hang on. Actually, have you seen it? Happy Christmas in that
Yeah.
case. Have
Merry
a wonderful
Christmas.
time. Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, by the way, Dave,
Yeah.
I managed to get hold of the last copy of the Newsner book
Oh,
on
good.
Amazon. Someone in America was actually shipping it over
Listen.
to was actually shipping it over to the UK. Had to pay £100 for it, but yeah,
It's well worth it.
I have now got a copy. Well, it's coming to me for January, so
Okay.
yeah. I'll speak to you soon.
Both volumes?
Both volumes, yes. But
Okay,
I can't even get it on my doesn't even come up in my uni library, even as an ebook. So I don't know what's going on, but yes, I will have it soon. So happy Christmas.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.
Hey, David, I have a couple questions if it's all right.
Yeah, sure.
So the Oxford Journal of Theological Studies
Uh-huh.
is it's like an anonymous selection essentially. So when we submit the article, we're going to submit it without author information. And I kind of ran into like a block when it came into having a co-author, because I wanted something in my hands to persuade them, to be like, here's what I'm doing, here's what it looks like, can we be co-authors? But then I got so far down the line that I'm like, adding a co-author is really just going to be them slapping their name on it right now, because I'm mostly through all the work. So since it's a blind selection, I'm wondering if that'll be necessary. And I looked into the qualifications, and you don't have to have a PhD to do that. So I'm wondering if for this one I can refrain from having a co-author.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then the next ones I'll have this previous article, so I could be like, here's what I've done. Do you want to work with me on this next one, kind of thing? Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I've actually published a couple of places where that I've recognized the enthymeme. So if you want those references, you can say an enthymeme a truncated syllogism has been briefly noted recently. And then that way,
In the Galatians allegory?
yeah, I've got a couple of publications that
Oh, cool.
basically in books.
Oh, you've got them. Okay, I thought you were saying somebody else did. I was like, oh no,
no,
I'm
no,
interacting with the wrong people.
no.
Okay.
So I can give you those reference when
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
so let's
do this.
let's continue on. This is the first of the slides, and I'm starting with something from Newsner, like I have been doing a lot.
Yeah.
And he says that the Septuagint translation contains elements of Jewish exegesis is obvious. It was, after all, a product of Jewish scribes or scholars. In analyzing the exegetical tradition in the transmitted Septuagint manuscripts, modern scholars face a crucial decision: whether to date Midrash traditions in respect to their occurrence in the Greek Torah, or to explain Septuagintal changes as textual variants and the Midrash as commentary on earlier Hebrew texts other than the so-called Masoretic one, the Textus Receptus, common in the Middle Ages onwards. So in the first case, where there's whether or not the traditions in respect to occurrence in Greek is Midrash. In the first case, we have to postulate an influence of the Septuagint on rabbinic Midrash, which is, I think, is true. In the second case, we can date rabbinic exegetical tradition as early as the 1st century BC, which I think is also correct. So it's kind of a dichotomy here. But I think Midrash was really there in the first century BC, and Hillel knew about it and taught it to Paul in the first century BC. So, so that's kind of a interesting dichotomy of thought. I want to start here with the loan word manna. We've talked about loan word before, and in the Greek, the word manna is a transliteration of the word Hebrew. So it's a loan word, and I want to see if Midrash can help us in the word study of the word manna. So if we were to do a word study, we would look at all these sections of scripture, but we would look at them alone. We wouldn't see whether or not there's any commentary on them. But since we know there's a commentary on Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, we should look at the symbolatory midrash of those sections of the source text. So what I've done is I've highlighted in bold in Numbers, Joshua, and Hebrews, where I think Paul has actually added a little bit of to our understanding of manna, whereas in Exodus and Deuteronomy, really there's not anything in the midrash that I could see that builds upon the word manna. So in the first use in Exodus, manna is given enough for the day. In Galatians, I don't see anything through here unless you were to say through angels, and we know that manna is the bread of angels through another portion of scripture, but that's kind of obtuse. So really, I really can't see anything that did Paul see manna here and put it in here? No, I don't see anything there. The second one in Numbers, where manna was like coriander seed, its appearance like bdellium. We've already seen that it looks like Paul was commenting on Anaphora, so he came to his side, so he was like manna from heaven to him. So that looks like looks like what you could add to a word study through Midrash, that someone could be manna from heaven to another person. And then, excuse me, in Deuteronomy, where there was, he fed them with manna. Again, I don't see anything in First Timothy where he is taking this idea of being fed with manna and puts it into First Timothy. And this is very Pauline. Sometimes he'll skip over a section, doesn't cover every single thing, but maybe he'll cover it somewhere else. And then in the second part of Deuteronomy, so Deuteronomy 8:16, Deuteronomy 8:3, there is this idea of manna is also in this section. And the only thing is we have this idea of the proto-evangelium that we've seen before. We're saved through the childbirth. Is that we're saved through the bread of life? That's kind of obtuse reference, and I don't see that as something that Paul did, but maybe he did it, but it would be just circumstantial to say that, I think. And then the last one, the manna ceased when, and then they ate the fruit of the land, and there's this reviling and deceiving mouths should be stopped. So this is obviously a reference when we have received the bread of life, we should not be reviling, we should not be deceiving. and those whose mouths are doing that, they should be stopped. So there's obviously a connection between the manna ceasing and the mouths must be stopped here. And then the last one, where Paul is referring to the tabernacle and all these things that are within the tabernacle, the lampstand, the table, and then the golden altar, the mercy seat, the pot holding the manna. We've looked at this before. Jacob finds himself at Bethel, which means house of God. This is the tabernacle, and we're in this Holy of Holies. And he says, oh, this is the gate of heaven. So it looks like Paul, through Midrash, includes the pot and manna with this idea of being in the Holy of Holies. So three portions of the Midrash in different ways kind of allude to the manna. One allusion from the source text. We know that in that last one, Paul in many places does talk about all the ordinances of the tabernacle. So that's one way that you could use Midrash in a word study, as long as there are some words that actually are used out of the source text. There's something that we'll talk about a little bit more, but as long as we're talking about the manna, it's was like coriander, from a word that means to gash, and it looked like bdellium, which means distinguished. So Yeshua the Messiah is the distinguished and gashed seed, and proclaimed himself the true bread of heaven. Interesting what Paul does here is in Hebrews 9:2-5, he uses the word golden, gold, and golden, and it's a reflective echo of something that's actually in Kelly's portion of the source text, gold, golden, gold, gold, when the servant is giving the surety to the bride, to Rebecca. And then in Genesis 28, in this section of the source text, we have this Jacob rolling the stone from the well's mouth in order to water the flock. And we have Yeshua becoming the collateral of the better covenant when he rolled the stone away, of course. So we have this kind of confluence of ideas in reflective and anticipatory echoes. That is quite fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know what quite to call it, but it's there. So now I want to kind of do a little bit of the first use words. There's 3 words out of Amos, and I want to just talk about those. Last week we saw this one, because they sawed by iron the ones having won in the womb in Gilead, and that is in Hebrews 11:37, and we saw that. I always thought that referred to Isaiah, but in the context of all these other words, it actually is referring to 1 Kings 8:12, when women were actually sawn in two. And where Paul uses it, remember, this word faith is built around the faithfulness of the children of Israel to return to Joseph. And it's a foreshadowing of the children of Israel to return to the Messiah. And Paul could have used two different words here. He could have used the verb form, but he used the noun form of the word faith in all throughout Hebrews. So the noun form is in Deuteronomy 32:20. And I will turn away my face from them. I will show what is to be in the last time. So contextually, it's actually has to do with the last times. For is a generation being distorted sons in which there's no belief in them. And that's the Strong's number. And we saw this in your section where there's an ellipsis, which strengthens the infamy. And also in your section or in your article, the other word is used, the verb form. Abram trusted in God and it was imputed to him as righteousness. Well, that's used in Galatians also, but there's still an ellipsis in Galatians 4. And what's that ellipsis pointing toward? Is pointing toward Abraham's faith, which is the same kind of faith that we have when we trust in the glory that occurred on Golgotha, right? And that was, we saw that was, so the idea here with this word faith, and this word sawn apart in Amos, we saw all these things that were going to happen that were built around the faithfulness of the children of Israel to return to the Messiah. And this is one of the things that is that Paul builds, is in those last days, there will be women who are sawn apart with child. And essentially that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the prophetic fulfillment of this gruesome thing in our lifetime, in our nation. And we hear about it almost every day. It's just gruesome. When I was an intern, I delivered 84 babies, but I also delivered a baby that was 26 weeks in gestation. And that little baby fit in the palm of my hand, and she was just redder than a beet and had no hair or anything, and she was gasping for breath. At that time, in 1982, we didn't have the ability to save a child at 26 weeks. Now we do, but her little chest was pounding with her heartbeat and her gasping, and it was, there was nothing to do except to let the heartbeat slow down and hold her and comfort her and keep her warm. And but I've asked God if I could be the adoptive parent of that child when we get to heaven. But this gruesome thing is happening, and there's other gruesome things that are happening also. There's the profane type of worship of God happening, the defilement, sexual immorality. So all these things, of course, we're talking about the Midrash here, but all these things are happening in our days, and it brings us to this second word in Amos, which is translated dislocated. So what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. And this is out of Amos 5:8, and Paul uses it 5 times. We'll only talk about it in Hebrews 12:13, but you can look it up in these other sections of the Midrash. But in the Septuagint, it says, the one making all things and fashioning them differently and turning the shadow into morning and darkening day into night, the one calling on the water of the sea and pouring it upon the face of the earth, the Lord God Almighty is his name. So obviously we know from Colossians 3 that we're talking about the Lord Yeshua the Messiah. Nothing was created without his being involved. And he's the one that turns the shadow in the morning. So right in the midst of all this despair and profanity and immorality is this little hope of healing and being turned from shadow to light that Amos is talking about here. So we know people are going to be saved during the tribulation. And then the last use, the last word out of Amos that Paul uses, that has its first use, is united with him in Romans 6. And it's really better translated planted together. This is where it's used in Amos 9:13. Behold, days come, says the Lord. So this is in the future. And the threshing shall overtake gathering of the crops, and the grapes shall grow dark in the sowing, and sweetness shall trickle down the mountains, and all the hills shall be planted together. So what Paul does here is he takes this idea, become planted together with him in the likeness of his death. And so we also may be part of his resurrection. So planted together gives us this idea of a seed, a dead seed planted with him in the likeness of his death. And obviously we see this in baptismal ceremonies. We will be raised with Christ. We will be part of his resurrection. And interesting, we kind of lose this contextual meaning, planted together, in the English translation, but planted together goes right with what he's contextually talking about. So all these with words, soon and soon, have this idea of, it comes from the warp or the woof of the garment. So the warp is the threads in one direction, and the woof is the threads in the other direction. They're woven together tightly to make a garment. And it's within the laws of leprosy, but Paul uses, this is the only place where these words are used, but Paul uses these words to say that we are woven together with Christ in his crucifixion. We are planted together. We are woven in the planting together. We're woven in our bearing together with him. We're woven together in our living with him. And so that's this idea where he gets this from, and out of Leviticus, and we see a little part of it with his use of Amos there.
Yeah, I see that.
He's quite impressive. Here's a resource I'd like to show you. If you and this will be on the PDF that I put together and send out. But if you look up Bullinger's articles, his resource, he has 969 pages of literary devices.
Wow.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure he hasn't covered them all. But the first one is from pages 714 and 715. This is anacoluthon, which is a breaking off of the sequence of thought. And we often see this as a parenthetical statement. So it's seen in Galatians 2. Here you can say, but from those who were reputed to be important, there I say, who were respected, imparted nothing to me. So you really don't need the parenthetical statement, but this parenthetical statement is the anacoluthon. So whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. God doesn't show impartiality to man. So this is often in Bibles. Now we have these dashes, but it's also a parenthesis. So The next one I'd like to talk about, let's see, hang on. So the question is did Paul see an anacoluthon here? Or did he see some kind of a literary device? The literary device here is the bet essentiae, which is the bet that's in front of the El Shaddai, meaning the El Shaddai and the Lord, either Jehovah or Yahweh, however you want to pronounce it, is the same person, and not really a anacoluthon, but is that what Paul saw, or am I missing something? Is that why Paul put in an anacoluthon? Here's one that we know, apposition. Two phrases stand in apposition to each other. So here's one, Ephesians 1:7, in whom we have our redemption through his blood, and then the forgiveness of our trespasses. So here is the apposition, according to the riches of his grace. In the simulative section of the source text, we have another apposition. And in Isaiah 3:24, it shall happen that instead of sweet spices, there shall be wetness. Instead of a belt, a rope. Instead of a well set hair, baldness. Instead of robe, wearing a sackcloth. So there's the apposition in that section of Isaiah. Did Paul see the apposition here in Isaiah and decide, well, I'm going to put an apposition here as well? On top of all the other complicated things that he did he do that as well? And we've talked about some of those complicated things before. Other literary devices. Here's a proposed term that I'd like to make, intersecting Midrashim. So this is, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on here a little bit. So in the Midrash in Hebrews 3 of the promise given to Abraham in Genesis 13, Paul midrashes the mighty works of God in the wilderness. And then in the Midrash of Galatians 3 at the start of the wilderness journey of Exodus 20 or Exodus 12, after seeing the mighty works of God, Paul midrashes what that promise given to Abraham is. So let me put a little diagram to make that a little bit less complicated. So here are the two sections. So the section of the Midrash and the section of the, let me take this out, section of the source text. And we have the section of the Midrash and the section of the source text. So in this section of the Midrash, we say, who, when they heard, rebelled? Wasn't all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? And then we see in this section, those that were led out of Moses, they were about 600,000 men and a mixed multitude. And then in this section of the source text, we have the Lord spoke to Abram and reaffirmed his promise of land to his descendants. And then in this section of Galatians, we have the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his offspring. He doesn't say to descendants as to many, but as to one for your offspring, which is Messiah. So it has this intersection of thought between the source text and the Midrash in two different sections, which is fascinating. It obviously hasn't been described before, but I've proposed the term the intersecting Midrashim. So have you heard of this word epizeuxis?
No, sir.
Well, Kelly and I thought maybe if anyone had, you had, but I hadn't. So it's a repetition of a word. We'll take the easy one first. So here's the definitive article in Ephesians 3:9. This is a recognized epizeuxis, and is translated the one, literally the all things having created. And so we typically leave the second the out, the one having created all things is how it's translated in modern version. So how about in Isaiah? This Ephesians goes with Isaiah. Is there an epizeuxis in Isaiah? Well, thou shalt keep you in perfect peace. That word perfect peace is an epizeuxis. In the Hebrew is shalom, shalom. So did Paul see the epizeuxis in Isaiah and put a like epizeuxis in Ephesians? Fascinating. Here's another one. We've seen this before. This is a quote of Isaiah, in a little while, in Hebrews 10:37. And that actually may be an allusion to the twins in Tamar's womb. An epizeuxis that is alluding to twins. And of course, twins is an epizeuxis by definition. So, so is that what he was doing? And then in the perfect peace, here's the perfect peace right here, and here is the epizeuxis in Ephesians with the repetition of the definitive article. Was Paul seeing the epizeuxis in one and now showing the epizeuxis in the other? And I've waited until now to blow you away with this thought. Was he actually midrashing literary devices also? Up until now, we've seen literary devices and haven't looked back and to see where they come from. But I think he might be doing this.
I've noticed you alluding to it. So yeah, it's interesting.
Anaphora. Have you ever heard of the word anaphora?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a use of an alternate word to avoid repetition. So here's the, but even though we or an angel from heaven should proclaim to you any good news other than that which we preach to you. All right, there's the first part of the anaphora. Let him be cursed, as we've said before. So now I say again, if any man preaches to you any good news other than what you received. So there's the anaphora. He could have said, he didn't say it again. So now I say it again. Did he say it again? No, he didn't say it again. He said it. Well, yes, he did. He said it again through anaphora. So interesting that. So in that section of Exodus, is there an anaphora? So the Egyptians, there's the first part of an anaphora. And instead of Egyptians down here, he uses a pronoun. So a very simple anaphora. Instead of repeating Egyptians, he uses a pronoun. Ruthlessly made the children of Israel serve, and they made their lives bitter. And instead of using the children of Israel down here again, he uses them, another pronoun. So a double anaphora. And did Paul see the anaphora here? And just through a literary device, use another anaphora. It's getting a little bit more than circumstantial now, but I think maybe in his brilliance he did it. So here it is, and the two lined up with each other. Here's an anaphora with an ellipsis, the ellipsis being part of your strengthening. So we know ellipsis can be used with other things like ellipsis, enthymeme with ellipsis. Here is an anaphora with ellipsis. So in Ephesians 6:12, for our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but with principalities, against powers, against worlds, rulers of darkness of this age. So he's saying, for our wrestling is not against principalities. Our wrestling is not against powers. Our wrestling is not against worlds, rulers of darkness of this age. So he's omitting it so he doesn't repeat himself. So he's doing anaphora with ellipsis. This has been recognized before. What hasn't been recognized is where Paul got this from. So in Isaiah, we know this, Jesus, Yeshua, said this in Luke 4, I think. He said, he sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives, to release those who are bound. So he could have said, he has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives. He sent me to release those who are bound. He has sent me to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and vengeance. He has sent me to comfort all those who mourn. He didn't. He used anaphora with ellipsis in this section. Did Paul take this idea of anaphora with ellipsis and put it right here? I think he did. I think you could make a strong case for that. So here is this idea. We've seen the lineup of these two sections of scripture before. Now, I hadn't heard this word before, epanalepsis. Have you ever heard this before? Epanalepsis.
Yeah.
So I think there's over 200 literary devices in the Greek. This is just another one. They're all part of this this midrashic hermeneutics that I think we're building or we're trying to reconstruct. So in Romans 3, so this is just a repetition of the initial part of the clause in the clause. So here in Romans 3:25 and 26, he says, whom God sent to be an atoning sacrifice through faith in his blood for a demonstration of his righteousness, that through the passing over of sins in God's forbearance to demonstrate his righteousness. So here is epanalepsis. So the repetition of a clause. And is it in Leviticus? So Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commanded, all right, that you should do, that the Lord's glory shall appear to you. Moses said to Aaron, draw near to the altar and you shall offer your sin offering and your burnt offering. And here's another, it's a double epanalepsis. And it kind of gives us this idea that there's a chiasm built into this as well. Mm-hmm. Make atonement for yourself and for the people and the offering of the people, and make atonement, there it is, and for them as the Lord commanded. So here's this idea, the Lord commanded, and then the Lord commanded, make atonement, make atonement. So it's a double epanalepsis. Did Paul see this and build this into the structure of his midrash, his commentary? I think you can make a fairly good case that that's the case. Here's one in Ephesians that's been recognized. For this cause, I, Paul, am prisoner of Messiah for this cause. So for this cause, for this cause. So another epanalepsis. So here we saw the two sections are linked together by a literary device, and kind of wanted to bring to point that we're talking about the glory of the Lord, and kind of wanted to use that as a segue into Mount Sinai's connection. Here's another word, paradiastole. I've seen this before. For I'm persuaded that neither death nor life nor angels nor principalities. So here's this this putting alongside all these things, or reframing, and you often see it in the neither nor comments. Did Paul bring this out? I'm going to leave this as a did he really do it or not, as a question. Maybe someday you'll have time to get back and take a look at that. And then epistrophe, the repetition of a word at the end of successive clauses. If God is for us, who could be against us? Repetition of the pronoun us is obviously an epistrophe. Did he take this out of Leviticus? I'm going to leave that up in the air for now. There is Appeno Diplosis, repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning and the end of a phrase or a sentence. I live, but Messiah lives. That's Appeno Diplosis. I now live in the flesh. I live is another Appeno Diplosis. Hope that is seen is not hope. That's obvious Appeno Diplosis. Did Paul take this out of Leviticus? I'll leave that up in the air for now. But give you this idea. So this is where we started, and we've had a lot of literary devices and introduced this idea of did Paul take a literary device and build a commentary based on a literary device? If he did, I'd say that's fairly complex.
I was thinking about, I might have this wrong, but I believe in the Islam tradition, they reworked their language around the Quran. And so they have a very interesting relationship between their religion and their language. And it's got me thinking about the concept of like pure language. So like in linguistic studies, they're always searching for such a thing. It's like, yeah, it's just this mythical thing, but it's like, I'm wondering if when via inspiration, God was having the Old Testament written, was he paying attention to what was commonly known as literary devices, what would be known as literary devices, or was he constructing a pure language in what he would want? And that's what Muslims would say about how the Quran was written. They would say it's pure language. So if it is pure language in the Old Testament, and the New Testament writers are basing their writings from the Old Testament, then they'd be basing their writings off of this pure language, essentially. So it's like, I'm wondering how much these authors really paid attention to what we call literary devices, because we're making more literary devices. Or if we're basing what we now call literary devices off of essentially a pure language. It's interesting thoughts. Yeah.
Very interesting. I think it was the chicken across the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the original.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Well, I hope that you'll all these ideas are kind of just swimming around in your brain, waiting to be birthed in some kind of a original thought.
Yeah,
Like
I think this specifically is because a lot of the people talking about the Galatians trope are, they're distinguishing between allegory and typology and analogy and metaphor. And, Paul uses allegory because he didn't have anything else. It's like half the writers want to call it typology, and there are typological elements, but it's like we created typology. You can take one concept and break it down into 100 things, but at the time that the person used the concept, that's all that they were using is for. So yeah, literary devices in terms of scripture is just so interesting because the way that they use it, we're using it differently now. They're flexible. So it's like, it's hard to go back and see what pure language for them looked like. So.
And I wonder whether or not the prophets who were looking at all this knew about all these things and built them into their prophecies as well. And it was part of the school of prophecy, and it's way above my pay grade. to tell you the truth. We're really swimming in deep water here. So
Yeah, we are.
appreciate you swimming in the same pool.
Yeah, for sure. It's fun. I have a lot of fun.
Oh, good. So when you tell people that you're doing this Midrash thing, do people still roll their eyes, or are you just avoiding telling them, or how's that going?
Yeah, no, I'm still telling them. I think you got to stick to your guns, you know? It's good. I'm really excited, Dave, because right now I'm working at my school in the admissions office. But I have an interview for a different position there, working as a researcher for them as well. So that would be phenomenal because I'd be doing what I love to do, which is research. So I have an interview at 1:15 Texas time, and I'll have to go through this again. I'll have to explain to him what I'm currently doing, what the Midrashic Institute, is and everything. So you gotta stick to your guns, and I'm doing it, and that'll be today. So
How many applicants are there?
I think I didn't actually see it posted. The HR office told me about it. So I think probably like one or two others. Yeah. So
Well, I hope you get it.
yeah, me too. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I'm glad you stayed with the admission thing. So
Yeah.
didn't drop that out.
No, yeah, I didn't, but this would be very, very cool. Full-time research. So
All right. Well, next week we'll do a review, and we're actually going to talk about the plumb line of Zerubbabel and how that Paul builds that into his Midrash. And we're going to talk about the birth of Messiah at the Feast of Tabernacles at Sukkot. And how Paul weaves that in. We celebrated on December 25th, but we know that didn't happen then. But
Yeah.
when did it really happen? And
Oh.
Paul actually comments on it in his Midrash. So we're going to look at that,
That'd be sweet.
among other things. So have a great week, and
Merry Christmas Day.
yeah, you too. And God bless you on your interview.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Take care.